Mike is kind of VP Transformation at the American Planning Association. Now, when I first heard about the American Planning Association, I thought, who? Who are they? What do they do? Never heard of them. Turns out you guys are something, right, Mike?
Yeah, we're kind of, I mean, from Stuart, from your perspective, I'd say we're sort of like the RTPI of the states. It's the national membership organization for urban planners and also members of the community who are interested in advancing issues related to transportation, urban design, environmental planning, and all kinds of aspects of the built environment. So we represent and advocate for one of the professions, along with architects, landscape architects, who really make communities what they are. And so it's an organization that's about 100 years old. And a couple of years ago, when we started the journey, it was like a very old organization with a very new CEO who we were so excited to bring on, and who really kicked off that process. I don't want to put the cart before the horse, but I think our new CEO back in 2019 definitely had a vision for how the organization could get work done differently. And his leadership and the support of our board of directors, along with the CEO, has really made all this possible. So Joel Albizo is the man's name, who had, I think, previously worked with Laura in other organizations here in the States. And I think he was certainly the catalyst to start us on this journey. But so I've been with the organization for a very long time. I was the leadership director working with volunteer leaders in governance at all levels of the organization. And this opportunity arose, and I kind of jumped at it. It's really been, I don't want to get too far along into the storytelling before we introduce Laura, but it's been a great experience so far. And we had a colleague, actually our CIO, who's the sort of old technology guy, who told me in front of a staff meeting, in front of the whole team one day, after I had done a presentation about the work we're doing, he's like, Mike, you're so brave to try to learn new things at your age. And I was like, oh, Mark, you were going to pay for that one. But
yeah, that's one of those kind of backhanded compliments, right?
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, Mike. So I'm really delighted to have Mike here. And I met Mike through Laura, actually. Laura made the introduction very kindly. So I imagine most people on the call know who Laura Barnard is, but she is the queen of the PMO land. She just is this inspiration for so many of us. I know we've been collaborating with Laura for several years now, and our product would be nothing like it is now without the inspiration and the generosity of spirit of Laura, sharing her knowledge, not just with us, but with the whole community, right? So I'm really excited. I can't wait to see Laura in a couple of weeks in person again. Yay! And Will, I love your comment. Will, was it Will?
It's Willetta.
I want to be like Laura when I grow up. Will,
yeah.
Does that mean that you want to obsess about which seat you sit on in the plane, which restaurant you eat in, which, right? Is that what you're saying? Really?
All right. So a little background here. By the way, hi, I'm Laura Barnard. I'm Chief Impact Driver for PMO Strategies. If you don't know me, and if you don't, please come say hi to me for sure, because, well, one, we're going to be in all kinds of places like Riyadh, and I'm also all over LinkedIn. But the deal is that it takes me probably about 30 hours total to get from my house to Riyadh. And so, yes, when Stuart and I were talking about our flights and everything, I was like, I've got to be able to lay down somewhere so that I can sleep either on the plane or somewhere in a lounge, because I can't stay awake for 30 hours and then get on stage multiple days in a row and speak at the Global Project Management Forum in Riyadh. So that's what we're talking about. And speaking of, Stuart, you're going to get a chance to meet Dawn Mahan at the Global Project Management Forum, because she's going to be coming to speak. And Dawn is here in the audience to cheer you along, Mike. So shout out to Dawn. We love you so much. And none of what we did with APA could have been possible without Dawn hand in hand with me by my side, helping to make it all happen. So Dawn, we love you so much. I don't want to put you on the spot by pulling you up on the stage, just in case it's not a makeup day. That's what I like to say. But here, and we love you so much. And she also has a book coming out. So I've talked about the Impact Engine book with some of you, but Mike, you'll have both books hopefully in your hands when Dawn and I come to see you next month. And then Stuart, of course, you've got some coming on the way to you, being shipped to you. So anyway, if you don't know, the Impact Engine book is coming soon. It's actually available for pre-order now, but we haven't
All right,
officially.
we're going to do plugs later on.
Yeah.
Put it in the box.
I'm just saying we're not
Yeah.
officially live yet. So all right, let's rock and roll.
So what we're here to talk about, right, is Mike's journey. So as Laura said, that the APA didn't necessarily have a whole lot of infrastructure, a whole lot of capability at the start of this journey. And so it's going to be just a story. Mike's got a couple of slides, but really I think it's going to be more of a conversation, hopefully, right? So actually a really nice place. When we were in the green room chatting before we started the webinar, Mike, you were just telling me about your trip up to Minnesota.
Yeah,
that might be a fun place to start. Let's start at the end of the journey, and then we'll go back to the beginning.
That's a great idea, Stuart. I came in last night from a week-long conference we had in Minneapolis, Minnesota, which is, you might say, hey, Mike, that's kind of a weird conference venue for a big national organization. We often go to other big cities, but our members, because they're planners, they love to visit different places. And there's a really compelling planning story unfolding right now in the city of Minneapolis related to reform of zoning and doing things differently and innovating in the way local government and land use works. And I was telling Stuart that the sense that I got of the new position and the new kind of voice of the planning movement in this country was on full display, and the excitement and the kind of the innovative position that the organization has taken. Traditionally, I think APA would be kind of like, there used to be your father's Oldsmobile was an old advertising slogan in the US, where it was sort of like the traditional practice and tried and true suburban status quo represented by the organization. And today, largely as a result in the outcome of these strategic initiatives we've been working on through the PMO, we're in a position of really being an innovator and a thought leader and sort of driving the practice forward, and also ensuring that the value of planning is recognized by elected leaders. That's what our members really wanted. I think part of the reason we have created the SDO or the PMO the way we have is to align with what the strategic priorities of the board are. And I was telling Stuart, at the beginning of this journey, I was thinking, okay, we want the board to be happy. We want the national leadership to recognize that we're really getting impact on the things that matter most to them. But what I realized is not only did we do that, we made the board happy, we aligned and we're moving in the direction that they wanted to go, but it also was really changing the organization. It's changing the way we're perceived, and it's creating tremendous value for members who now have a really clear story to tell about the value of the work the profession does. That's compelling and that's relevant, and it's getting recognized. And so I think that excitement in that week-long event was evidence to me of the transformation that was brought about through the Impact Engine system that Laura trained us on. So that's really, I think, Stuart, if you want to show the slides, we can start at the beginning to kind of where we were at.
I just want to tease out something that you said, but I just want to make this really, really clear. The journey that Mike and the APA has been on, right, hasn't just what Mike just said is it hasn't just transformed the APA, it's transformed an entire industry.
Yes.
Right? Think about that, guys. How often do you get the chance to transform an entire industry? Not often. I've got goosebumps now, Mike. I don't know what. Can you see this? Good Lord. So that's pretty amazing, right? And so yeah, let's jump into the slides, because the starting point for this was a discussion we had. I was talking about the whole goal here is to increase your ability to execute strategy. Now, I kind of asked you a question. Do you remember that question?
Yeah, you said how much more impact have we had after implementing all this stuff than before? And I think initially you said, well, has it doubled the impact? And I think that's really, in a sense, hard to quantify, because we went from really not measuring impact on a regular basis and just doing a bunch of stuff and doing as much of the stuff as we could, to now I think at least double or 150% the impact, because we can describe it, we can point to it, you can and also see the results and feel the results through the outcomes of these initiatives. So we were in a position, I think, where it's a membership organization, it's led by volunteers, there are lots of sort of old school political forces that I think generally when we had a strategic process, it would be kind of, let's make a big list of everything we want to do and add and add and add to that list. And I think I've been around, as I said, for quite some time. We would have 144 items on the 2-year strategic plan. And it literally was impossible to ever see what progress was being made. We didn't have any system for, and those were just like the wish list, the Christmas ornaments on the tree. We didn't have any way to measure or tie to the everyday work, the ongoing other operations, to see where we were making the impact or where we were making progress. And I think to the leadership over time, that was very frustrating because everyone, we said yes to everything. So there was, dozens of member groups and volunteer leaders and committees and councils, and everyone is sort of fighting for the same, modest sized piece of the pie. And while it's easy to say yes, it's frustrating, I think, over time that you don't really see measurable progress. And I think early in the conversations we were having with Laura, who joined us as an advisor and a partner in all this, she'd say, well, let's start with the list of the projects you have going on today. And I said, Laura, there is no such list. Let me look around a little bit. Let me try to pull together through conversations with executives and folks in management. And there was no one place. You could sort of look and depending on the definition, kind of hunt and peck and say, well, this is kind of a thing, or this, well, we were talking about this other thing. But we had very, very poor visibility, especially from the executive level, into what's happening across all the different parts. And it's not that big of an organization. It's like a $20 million annual budget, about 65, 75 staff. But it's still a lot of stuff happening at the volunteer and these sort of component and chapter levels.
For sure.
And
I just want to add something there that's where it gets kind of hard. He's saying, well, I'm not really sure because where we started was, I'm paraphrasing, such a hot mess that we wouldn't even be able to tell you how, if we've doubled, tripled, quadrupled, et cetera. And that can be a situation that a lot of people find themselves in, is they can't even tell you because there's so much chaos. And when that's the case, then okay, well, let's get to the root cause, which is we've got so many things going on. We don't have a list. Nobody can look at those things. Let's figure all that out and then figure out, how do we even get to the list, right? Baby steps. Okay. And so even if you can't measure, total hot mess chaos versus like double or triple throughput, what you can say is, well, I know that X percentage of projects weren't even actually finishing on time or within budget or things like that. That's something you could measure. So you may not be able to say that throughput number yet, but a baby step, which you were able to start getting at, Mike, which was, all right, like most of our projects are not finishing on time, or most of our resources are being spread across too many projects. And so you could get to some numbers there, and that started making the light bulbs go off for people. And so then when you matured a little bit more, then you could say, okay, well, now we've doubled or tripled, but it was probably, really, you're probably at a quadruple at this point because of what you put in place to get that list, prioritize, and all of that.
And I think also for us, the ability to really focus the resources and the effort on the things we knew were important, because we learned through the prioritization process what were the most important things. So we went from a system of having not really much in the way of definition to, in the first year or two, having a really compact list of 4 to 5 things that we knew we had to focus on, and we resourced appropriately. And even we haven't really talked much about the project management discipline that we gained through the training and coaching and support from PMO Strategies. But that's really been transformational. I think we were so immature at just the ability to plan out projects and think through things. And, everybody was working hard, but it was, as Laura said, so diffused and in so many different systems. And we didn't have a shared language. And I think the shared language of project management that we learned in the last couple of years through this process across the team, I'm talking about 25 project managers and sponsors, which is about a third of the entire organization now. There's sort of a culture, and building that culture and building that capability has been huge as well. Just for this is going to sound really naive, but the idea of like writing down the risks ahead of time and coming up with a plan to address those risks should they occur, countless times in the last couple of years, that has been such a game changer, because we never did it before. I mean, maybe people would, you wake up in the middle of the night worried about something. That was happening a lot. But the idea that you document it and come up with a plan to respond to it, I've just seen that make life so much easier and keep people so much more mentally healthy, because it's almost like a security blanket. You've got your risk register, and then you know what you're going to do in any of these cases. And then the ability to execute on that and like, oh, we knew this might happen. Here's what we're going to do, has really saved the day numerous times.
Well, so that's kind of an interesting point, Mike, right? Just dig on that for a little bit. What did it feel like working there before? And what does it feel like now? And the reason I picked up on that is that this, frankly, this is what motivates Laura and me to do what we do, right? So tell me, what did it feel like before, and what does it feel like now?
I think there was just a much higher. I'm trying to think. There's an analogy I used to always use about meatballs. Like with the 144 items on the old list, it was like a gigantic platter that was loaded with way too many meatballs. And as you knew, if you were going through the restaurant, that some of those meatballs are going to fall off, some of them are not. Some of them are going to cross the finish line, some of them are not. And it just, I think it kind of creates a low degree of confidence that anything you're actually working on is going to come to fruition or bear fruit or work out. And you kind of accept that after a while, and it becomes like part of the culture. Like, yeah, if it works out, it works out. If it doesn't, it doesn't. I think it's what we have instead today is a real intense feeling of satisfaction and confidence that when we say we're going to do something, we have the ability to see it through and do it. And it's not a guessing game, and it's not a question of which meatballs falls off at what point in the journey. And that gives people a sense of pride and satisfaction in what they're doing because they're confident that they can sort of meet those obligations and also deliver that value to the members, which is really the impact that when we have it, it's the experience of, and there's a couple other projects I'll talk about how, in addition to that sort of outreach campaign about the value of the profession, the world's changing fast these days. And our members, like everyone, are sort of looking around and seeing AI and social sort of polarization and political polarization really disrupting their world. And one of the projects we have is called upskilling planners. So looking into the future, and we have other ways of doing this through the practice of foresight and understanding what skills members are going to need in the future. And one of these strategic projects that was created to really identify the gaps that exist today between the skills that our members need and the skills they have, and then create education around those things. And so that has been tremendously valuable for folks who are like, living in, sort of a disrupted political environment where their public meetings are extremely contentious and they've got to deal with that. Well, now we've got a set of courses on conflict management that gives our members these tools, which we were only able to develop as a result, I think, of the project to create the methodology to understand what skills are emerging. Same with AI. We were so far ahead of the curve on AI and big data and local government, and giving the members the tools they need to put the use of those tools in the proper framework to ensure that they're not creating inequitable outcomes and that they're able to adhere to their professional ethics and use data responsibly. So some of those things, again, getting them to the impact of everyday life for people who are working in the public sphere and planning, none of those things would have been possible without this approach of the PMO and project management.
I just want to comment on something there, and I just put it in the chat for folks. I think it's important to note how much of Mike's conversation is about the business problem and tying project management solutions to the business problem, not the project problems. Does that make sense to everyone that's watching this? He looks at, here's the business problem we have in the industry. Here's how the work we're doing is impacting the industry. And he's running their strategy delivery office, their version of a PMO. But he's taking the business focused view and figuring out what business problems need to get solved, and then using project management as the solution. It's the means to get to the end, which is solving the business problems, not the end in and of itself. And that's where a lot of folks, and I'm sure the folks listening to this webinar can appreciate that because they're here because they've been listening to us talk about these kind of things for a while, Stuart, right? But that's a really important thing to remember, not just for all of you, but for your project managers, the people working on your projects. Your goal is to use the power of project management to solve business problems and always start with that business problem in mind. So just want to point that out, that I think that's a really unique perspective.
Thanks for that, Laura, because there was a really subtle thing that you said earlier, Mike. I think you used a phrase, you said something like, we discovered this sort of small set of goals, business goals that we had.
Right,
through the prioritization process. So that's good. The prioritization process is working, right? But you discovered, that's a really interesting word. right?
Yeah.
You discovered that. Tell me more about that, because that's what lets you do what Laura just talked about.
Yeah, I think and this kind of relates to, so I was thinking, I keep looking at the first bullet on this rubber ducky slide about the foresight and the strategy system we've been building. And that's, project management and the prioritization are really just part of this. What we've created is really a replicable, intelligible annual cycle of updating the strategy to stay current and do that on an ongoing basis. And the discovery process, I guess in 2019 or 2020, right around the start of this effort, we came up with an envisioned future for what we thought the organization, the profession should look like, and then identified some obstacles and goals. And I think I was struck by how clearly the things, the big pillars of the strategy relate to those barriers that exist. Whether it's a lack of, inability to stay up to date with skills, an obscure understanding of what the profession, the value of it is, or a perception that the planning has contributed to social inequity in the country. And each of those things, we've now got a system for addressing those obstacles and pain points that's preventing us from getting to this envisioned future. And I don't know, maybe I'm naive. I'm pretty mature individual in terms of chronological age, but I was like, this really worked. It felt like a discovery to me that the system.
So you're not dreaming, Mike, right? So there's a couple of cool bits of research, and people who join our webinars will know that whenever I can, I reach for research to validate what our intuition is telling us, right? And so there are a couple of really cool bits of research that looked at the overall performance of organizations. And I've seen this done with government agencies and with private companies. I haven't seen it done with nonprofits, but I've seen it in those other two domains. And so they were looking at the overall performance of the organization and the degree of strategic alignment of what they were doing with the organization. And the correlation between those two, anybody who's into statistics, they ran a regression, they got an R squared of 0.8. So basically 80% of the variation, right, in the data was explained by strategic alignment. Now that kind of implies that being able to align your investments, and that's not just prioritization, that's about resource management, it's about execution, it's about all those things, but being able to align your investments with your strategy is actually more important to the outcome of the organization than what the strategy is, right? That the link that you've been working on is more important than the actual strategy. You could have been executing any strategy, but by executing it well, right, you've achieved some amazing things.
That's incredible.
So that feeling that you have is absolutely borne out in the literature. So that's fantastic. So just sort of moving on a little bit. So you've talked about, and I'm looking at the slide here. I'm always drawn to any bullet that talks about aligning work with strategy and prioritization and things like that. For obvious reasons, right? That's the software that we sell, folks. But it
actually works.
Thank you, Laura. But it's more than that, right? Because it's just buying software isn't going to fix that process. So tell me about your journey, and then we've got a couple of questions from people. So keep asking those questions, folks. I'm tracking them, and I will try and weave them into the session. So keep asking those questions. So how did you how did you get through that process? What did that feel like? Who was involved?
Well, I think in 2020, but even before we encountered Transparent Choice, we had tried like a little homegrown version of it. I went back and looked at the Excel sheet we used. It was so quaint that where we asked the members of the board to identify how much value each of the 26 things we were doing at the time were. And we, cooked up a score and a chart. And because the pandemic was, we were in full force. It was spring of 2020. We're thinking, we don't know where organizations headed next. And we wanted to make sure we had, if we needed to do some cutbacks and to sort of tighten things up and economize and optimize, where were the areas we could focus on to eliminate programs. And so the executive team and the board had a little experience with that. So we kind of knew the concept or the idea, but I think Transparent Choice has been such a great option for us because our members are, people who involve themselves in civic engagement and getting input from the public. The idea of everyone having an online tool where everyone can sort of equally share their voice. The planners are very egalitarian, sort of small d democratic. They like everyone to be involved in the process. And so it was appealing in that sense. And I think the first year, in 2021, when we used the tool, we had a very short list of strategic sort of options for candidate projects and a very clear, short list of criteria. But people really took to it. The board really loved to see the outcomes and the weighting of the criteria. It all intuitively made sense to them. I think a couple of them, we've got an academic now on the board who's really digging into the details. He is just fascinated by he's got all kinds of ideas and suggestions, but it was sort of a good fit culturally with the organization and the executive team as well. Sort of this year, for the first time, they have, we're using the efficient frontier curve. I can't wait to see how that comes out. They're storing a much longer list of candidate projects that don't just include the new strategic ones, but also all the existing big and medium and small ticket stuff. But it's been great, and I think in the second year we had used the tool one time around, and it was time to sort of re-up with transparent choice. And I was talking to our CFO about, because he's like, "What is this thing again? Why are we doing this?" And I said, "Alex, this is the thing that has saved us hundreds of thousands of dollars in an international outreach program that really wasn't bearing fruit or creating much value." And we had this sort of reboot of our charitable foundation within the organization that we've been working, I don't want to say fruitlessly, but without a lot of results for a number of years. And those are the kinds of pet projects where there may be one or two super passionate advocates in the leadership or in the board for advancing those things. And because they sound like good things, international outreach, that's spreading the message about good planning, that sounds like something that's compelling. And so it almost is like, it's hard to say no to. But with transparent choice, it was in black and white. You could see, this only got a 17. And the top projects are like value scores of like 80s and 90s. And it was just so evident. And as soon as Alex was like, "You're right, we did." He said, "Okay." He signed the contract immediately, because you don't think, it's like we dodged a bullet. A year's worth of spinning our wheels and trying to come up with something new for something that's really not going to pay out very much in terms of benefit to members.
Right.
Well,
that was the most compelling thing.
That raises a really cool point, right? So Laura, you talk a lot about root cause analysis, and one of the most common root causes of challenges in project delivery is just having too many projects. Right. So that comes down to prioritization, which is what Mike's talking about right now. And one of the big challenges that you often have as a PMO leader is that powerful people will come to you with projects that are great projects. But the question isn't, is this a good project? The question is this the best project for that use of resource?
Right? And that's something I really want to comment on, that's really specific that this software does, is it removes the squeaky wheel or the outvoting, right? Or the person making the most noise, right? And that can be helpful on your board. That can be helpful with your C-suite. That can be helpful with your executives that you have looking across this portfolio of initiatives and doing that prioritization, is that it felt good. And when you're making decisions based on feeling, then it's not gonna, you could be working on all the wrong things. But this software specifically removes the squeaky wheel syndrome and actually makes it so that everybody has a vote and an equal voice and the ability to actually use real criteria that aligns with the goals of the organization and make it easy to not base it on feeling, but on the priorities, on the focus, on the strategic goals, and be able to say, this is not in alignment with our goals. And it's like Mike said, it's obvious. So I think that's a really big unique value proposition with this software that I think is important to acknowledge, because not every software does that kind of thing. It's like, oh yeah, we've got prioritization, but this one actually makes it so that using AHP, which definitely go look it up, analytic hierarchy process, talk about it in the book, shout out to Stuart. But it's really an important technique for making sure that people are removing the drama, the politics, and the squeaky wheels from the process, and just doing what makes sense based on the priorities and the strategic goals of the organization, based on criteria that they develop. So everyone has their input to the process, and everyone is talking on the same page with, this is what matters to us. So anyway, I just think it's a very inclusive process, which is really important. And it's something unique that this process does that helps to make it such that everyone feels like their voice is heard.
And that's,
So I think it
Yeah,
also,
it's
I would say, Stuart, I was thinking about just the process itself and how it felt in the first couple of years. I know that just the criteria weighting part of it itself, where the board is assigning value to the set of criteria, and then when we're reflecting it back to them, I felt that it was really reinforcing their own sort of
Yes.
cultural values, because they could see, oh, look, and they were like patting themselves on the back, I think in the best possible way, in a way that I support, of like, yes, we do think the long-term value is more important than short-term profit, and we're willing to
Sure.
sacrifice some viability to advance these key mission-related objectives. And they could see it in the pie chart, and they were feeling it in the room, and they're like, we did a really good job. They're kind of like, you know what,
Patting
we do
themselves on the back.
we do have our priorities straight, and it was like a feel-good moment.
Well,
Just
Yeah.
from
this feels like a great time to actually bring in Tina's question, which I'm just going to scroll back up and find it. Tina, there you go. So what hurdles or resistance did you have to overcome when reorging and the flight, and getting your arms around the portfolio? Because, as we said earlier, there were probably powerful people who had their pet projects, who were kind of going, yeah, you want to do what to my project? You want to kill my baby? Really?
there was definitely, there was the squeaky wheels
Yes.
on even the things that were de-emphasized, because again, it's an organization with a culture of saying yes to everything. I think in some ways we benefited just with the timing, and this isn't going to be replicable for everybody, but because the pandemic was happening and because there was so much disruption right around the same time, the idea of the board announcing we're going to pause on all these beloved but low value things for the time being, it was very understandable that, okay, this is related to circumstances and the world changing fast around us. So that addressed some of those things. And I think we still have folks from, because long-term leaders in the organization who've been around, and long-term staff as well, they're kind of like the old way and the old system. I think for them to see the value of the new things emerging as they did at this conference in Minneapolis, suddenly their faces light up. They see, ooh, this is an even better outcome than we were getting from the old thing that I used to love. I think that is helpful in addressing it. I think the other
Laura, yeah, and Laura, you talk about that, right? So Tina's, the heart of Tina's question, I think, is probably, there's probably a little bit of a plea for help in there somewhere, right? I'm a PMO. I know we could do better, but how do I get people to pay attention so we can get started, right? So you talk about this a lot.
Yes. Yeah. So a lot of it now when we bring our clients on, every client goes through the same system that folks like Willetta that are part of the Impact Engine system and our Impact Accelerator Mastermind, our clients go through the exact same process. So when people say, well, but what do you do with your clients? The exact same things that we teach in the Impact Engine system and that you'll read about in the book.
Say, Laura, is that in the book?
Yeah, it is the book. It's the reason for the book.
Did you mention there's a book coming out?
Listen, I have been told by my publicist that I bring the book up in every fourth sentence. So I think I'm doing pretty good here. So anyway, but I say that because, a lot of people are like, well, they need a place to start, an easy place to start. And that's why I wrote the book. It took me 10 years, but we did it. But the reason I'm bringing that up is that the groundwork, the foundation that we had to lay with Mike and the team and the folks at APA was understanding a mindset shift, which is getting back to what you're asking, Stuart, which is how do I think differently about the work we're doing? Just like we're talking about solve business problems, not project problems. We're talking about driving better business outcomes instead of focusing on perfecting outputs, right? And so, yes, Mike and the team, because they were able to take advantage of the chaos happening during the early days of the pandemic to say, this is an easy way to cut things out. There was also a lot of things that the pandemic brought about that made things harder. So I would say it levels out, right? So yes, you guys took advantage of the opportunity to say, okay, we're going to cut these things, but there has still been every year, this organization has to go back and say, okay, well, we have all this in-flight work. We have new priorities coming up. How are we going to addressed Tina's real question, which is how are we going to make all that happen? And I think that the secret ingredient there for this organization is that they're getting aligned right from the start, from the board to the C-suite executives, and using like transparent choice and Mike running the strategy delivery office to drive real focus, alignment, direction, and get the leaders to say the things that need to be said, right? Mike gets them to say and commit. And Joel's fantastic about this. He says what needs to be said. This is important. This is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to get to the outcomes. And not everybody listening might have their executive support today, but that's why we teach you how to do that in our process so that you can get that support. Now, Mike came with some of those special skills to the table, but but he still needed to, okay, we've had to tell him to be a little tougher, right? On his executives and really hold them accountable, right? And make sure that they say, well, now we said this, now let's make sure that our actions are in alignment with that, because you can't get the people to come along unless you start with that, at the top.
So I think also, Laura,
well,
if I could just add to it.
Sorry, go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say that in addition to everything Laura's talking about, all great points, I think the structuring and the setting up the system with lots of training and support, not just for the people who are new to project management and overwhelmed by that, in addition to all their operational stuff, but for the sponsors. I think that's really been key for the executive sponsors of these projects to understand this new kind of perspective and this new role, and have lots of coaching and sort of ability for them to understand what it's going to be like and what's different for them. That's really been huge in terms of what we've been able to offer through PMO Strategies to help them.
Fabulous. So Rachel just posted a thing. So Rachel, for those of you who don't know, Rachel, she worked forever at Keyed In, where she was the engine behind their annual report into the PMO. She's now moved across to PMO Squad, where she's kind of doing something similar. They've got a report coming out tomorrow. Look for it, folks. It's going to be great. Yeah. And she's just dropped a little spoiler in there that says that 93% of PMOs that don't have executive support say executives don't understand the value of the PMO. I would suggest that perhaps some of that may have something to do with the fact that the way that you all talk about the PMO and projects and everything else. Mm-hmm. That would be my guess. Now, Laura and I have talked about this ad nauseum in other forums. We're not going to do that right now, Laura. We're not going to get sidetracked.
I know. I'm holding it in.
I know. So now we're in danger of making this sound like all you do is you fix project prioritization and wonderful things happen. But that's not true, right? We sell project prioritization software. I want to be on record saying, right, it is a necessary but not sufficient condition for success. Right, is to get prioritization right. So tell us about some of these other bullet points, Mike, because you've got some other stuff in here that's the alignment bits about the prioritization and stuff, but you've got things about project management capability and methodologies. God, I hate methodologies. Right. So tell me about that. How did you approach that, and how did you avoid becoming the process police?
Well, Laura's motto always is give them what they need before
give them what they want.
Yeah. Give them what they want before what they need. Yeah. Sorry, I knew I was going to blow it. But so adapting, starting with the pain points of the executive, starting with only doing the things you need to do first. And because we were so immature
as the PMO, right?
As the PMO.
So that
we were addressing a small number of things. We started with just like 4 strategic initiatives in the first year, the first cohort of project managers, and then built on it from there. So we didn't try to train everybody at once. We didn't try to kick off with, and I think it's the sequencing that Mike Hannon teaches and talks about. We've been trying to get better at that as well. So we're not biting off more than we can chew. And adapting the methodology, the methodology that Don Mahan is really adept at, has an ongoing course on project management that is sort of streamlined we didn't learn all like 184 methodologies. We sort of stripped it down to what we needed to use, and adapted and really did it on this. I think they also, Don and Laura say, you learn math on paper before you get a calculator and computer and spreadsheet. So we were learning project management on paper and figuring out what systems worked for the organization and the culture and the work styles. and then creating all that as a method, as our methodology, before we ever got around to talking to Keyed In, which we did, and we've started using that tool as well. But before we automated anything, we wanted to figure out what worked for us across the whole process. So we really ran projects for 2 years before the tool implementation started up.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. I want to come back to that in a second. I want to come back to that in a second, but first I want to give a quick shout out to Ashok. Ashok joins every single one of our webinars. He's virtually a member of the Transparent Choice team at this point, and he always has such great comments to add. So Ashok, thank you again for joining and for contributing. We really do appreciate it. So Mike, you said something really important there that I think is a crucial part of the journey to success, right? Which was about figuring out what's going to work for you before diving into tools. This is one of the big mistakes that we see again and again, right? I've been selling software in one form or another for 30 something years. Software people are really good at saying, buy my software and the world will be perfect. I got to tell you, it doesn't work like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. As a software vendor, I am telling you, it doesn't work like that. So Mike, talk us through a little bit more about how you discovered what would work for you, and then eventually how did that become starting to think about, turning that into tooling and automation and all those sorts of things.
Yeah, I think how do we discover what worked for us? It was iterative. We did have ongoing coaching with Laura and Dawn, so that even as the process of building out the first year of projects and doing the planning for those projects, and we would try to, we'd use the project, what's it called, Microsoft's Planner, I want to say, to do work breakdown structures. I think that figuring out the level of complexity that was necessary and the number of different tools, because Dawn will bring the full toolbox. And then she had a worksheet with like 47 different tabs in it. And we were realizing, oh, most of these projects are only using like 14 or 11 of all the tabs in this workbook. So by actually working through the process, we figured, well, everybody needs a RACI chart. Everybody needs risk. Like by actually doing the project work and learning it together as we were doing so in that first year, we kind of it became apparent at the end of the year, whichever workbooks pages were still blank at the end of 2 years, those are the ones we're not using, obviously, in our culture. But and also I think working with listening to the PMs in the cohort. We would have regular monthly meetings, these sort of centers of excellence where they're sharing their challenges, so creating like a community within the organization of folks who are acquiring this new discipline and really listening and paying attention to what they were saying and learning from each other in the meeting, and then also taking away sort of the implications of how we may need to adapt things based on how it's going with the lived experience of those folks. So that's been a continual process over the last 3 years. And we do the same thing with the sponsors. They get together, not just in the governance meeting with the executive team, but among themselves, and finding those connections between projects, but also what's working and what's not working, and adapting as we went along.
Cool. So Hydron asks an interesting question here, right? Or an interesting observation. Without buy-in from the execs, they're not willing to renounce certain decision powers. I need them on board, right? So again, there's that little plea for help, but it doesn't work like that, right? Mike, it's not that one day you walked into the office and you said, all aboard, the train's leaving the station, right?
Absolutely.
It's about building momentum. So how did that really play out? Because I think we've had Tina's question, we've got Hydron's question. They're scratching at the same pain, right? So how did you address that?
I think that's a part of Laura's methodology. We're not asking anybody to renounce any powers. They maintain the decision-making authority. We are trying to understand their needs. So these in-depth interviews we would do with each of the members of the executive team to understand what their problems are. And that's where we started. Like, what's the thing that is bothering the CFO? What's the thing that the CEO wants to see come out of this process? And then starting with doing those things first, so that and using the language that they describe the problem with. The pain as they describe it is the thing that's up on my next slide. to say, this is what we're going to be delivering. And then to do just a couple of those things. And all of a sudden their faces light up and they say, yeah, he really gets it. This guy gets it, because you're reflecting back to them the things that they're under their skin.
So I heard several things there. I heard first listen and seek first to understand, I think is, a wise man once said, seek first to understand. Then use their language. You'd be amazed how much progress you can make just by changing the language that you use, right?
Stuart, I've been very impressed with some of your Aristotelian references and some of these other things. I have a feeling you're a pretty well-read young man over there. I'm impressed.
Well, I'm just delighted you called me a young man. That's fantastic. That's the result on my part.
I just want to comment that I think that's really critical here, and that's where a lot of PMO people get it wrong, unfortunately, and that's why they have such an uphill battle, is that they go in, they go into the role and they say, oh yeah, I see what's broken here. There's all this project management stuff that's broken. And so they start trying to solve project management problems, and they start saying, well, we need this and we need this and we need this. And when they talk to the executives, they keep using that same project management speak, like Rachel's saying here. And so all the executives here is that Charlie Brown when adults talk thing, right? I have no idea what you're talking about. Instead, when you do what Mike's talking about here, which is you go talk to the executives and you ask them about their pain in their words, then you repeat those words back to them. At 5-step communication framework, for those that are in the program, you go through that process to say, okay, here's your pain, here's our solution for it, but we're not going to geek out on the solution a lot. We're just going to mention that we've got it. And this is the outcome it'll drive, the impact it'll make on the organization, and how we'll know we're successful. When you change your language to talk about it like Mike's talking about here, then your executives aren't hearing that project management speak coming at them and like, oh, great, you hear me, you understand me, you get my problems. I don't have to get the PMO. Executives do not need to understand what the PMO does. The PMO people need to understand what the executives want. Solve that, and then it's so much easier to get the support that you need. You never have to spend a day selling the value of the PMO, because they see what it does, because it's solving their problems.
That brilliant. And there was a third thing, Mike, that was in there somewhere that you said was, or that you kind of skimmed over a little bit. You jumped to kind of the solution, but I know that you went through kind of root cause analysis. So there was problem, root cause analysis, then solution, right? And so that's, again, that's something that I think lots of PMOs kind of skip over. They try and solve the proximal problem, right? So why is my project failing? Because I had, because we didn't have enough resources. Okay, let's go buy a resource management tool. Okay,
right. And hire more people.
Yeah, and hire more people, right? That's the that's the first thing you see when you ask why is it failing, right? So you got to keep asking why. Why? Okay, so why do we have too many projects or too few people? Okay, why is that happening? And then because we've got too many projects. Okay, so why have we got too many projects? Well, because we can't prioritize. Why don't we prioritize? Because we don't actually know what our goals are. Right? And so it's only when you get to we don't actually know what the goals are that you can start to say, okay, well, if we solve that, right, then then the other stuff will just solve itself. Right.
And for us, Stuart, there's also something we haven't really talked much at all about it, but it's an element of our process that even gets us to what are our goals, which is to looking up and out into the world to see what is coming down the pike. This is the foresight practice that our research team does, to kind of keep an eye on, through a big community of trend scouts that meets on an ongoing basis throughout the year, and is looking, 5 to 10 years. What are those trends that are emerging, social trends, environmental, political, technological, that we think may have an impact on the organization or on the profession? And how do we be prepared for those? We're not trying to predict the future or look into a crystal ball, but to plan with the future so that we recognize what are the emerging things that we need to pay attention to as it gets closer and closer to the but often that's the annual sort of renewal process. But that was our starting point. Well, which of those emerging trends are really going to impact us the most? That's how we got to elevating the voice of planning, because we said there is a high level of distrust of expertise out there in the world. You can feel it every day today. What do we do about that? What are the implications for the organization of that distrust? Well, we are experts, so we better come up with a story that's compelling, that's going to bring folks back to recognizing that the value for them of our expertise.
Fabulous. And if you're in this situation where you're wondering, how do I get the executives to buy into my PMO, right? Mike just used a little phrase there. He started talking about political, economical, social, right? So if you don't know what pestle analysis is, right, then you're not speaking the language of executives. If you don't know, if you don't speak that language, then how can they take you seriously? Because you're not solving their problems. So, this just keeps popping up again and again and again. A big part of this journey is about upskilling yourself to be that interface between the strategic layer of the business and the execution layer of the business. Now, I'm conscious that we're going to smash into the buffers at the end of the 1 hour train track here. So Mike, should we move on and talk a little bit about the future?
Sure. I think it's like that. You can't quite see the horizon in this image here. And that's what it feels like. I think Laura's system is, and I would used to tell people, it used to just scare the heck out of me that you have 90-day cycles and continually getting better and better. I was like, I don't know if I can do that. Like, can we, get better month after month, year after year? But that is the journey we're on. And so I think our goal for this year is to achieve level 3, I think, in maturity of the PMO, and really enhance and get better. We've been using Keyed since last fall, but to get a couple final Jira integration, I think we still want to do with Keyed but get all the automation fully integrated into the budgeting and planning resourcing process. And then also for us, frankly, it's been a big challenge of creating project charters with the appropriate measurements in mind. And I think for us, because so many of the things we do are not just, the ROI is not just a dollar amount of revenue increase for a particular program, but it's really about like longer term outcomes that are on an organizational scale. And there are things like that, say, for instance, that elected officials have a better understanding of the value of planning. It's hard. It's a challenge for the teams to nail down those kinds of outcomes as measurable, quantifiable things. But that's what Dawn and Laura have really been helping us with, to think through those kinds of things. And then also, I think more sophisticated use of prioritization tools. At this meeting we were at last week, one of our board members who's an academic was asking me, well, Mike, what about for like nonlinear change in particular criteria? I was like, oh, don't, this nonlinear. Okay, so we're going to have to learn and work with you and Dan to accommodate all these creative ideas for how to use the tool there. And I think continuing to get that measurable impact with members and stakeholders. I think they're feeling it now. And I think there's another thing that Laura always talks about is sort of the pull into the PMO, the idea that people are increasingly understanding within the organization that if you want to do something different, if you want to make change in the organization, the way to do that is to think about it in terms of projects and charters. And how do we, if we want to affect change in the organization, we want to align to the direction the organization's going, that project management's a skill to have. You need to be able to use that vocabulary and mindset if you want to get where you want to be within the organization. So we have people beating down the door to get involved in the process. So that's been really fun too.
Yeah, I just want to make one comment for anybody that's got the yeah, but monster crawling up on their shoulder right now and saying, yeah, but they had all these things. They had PMO strategies. They had Dawn's amazing training. They had all these things, but that's not the case. That's not where they started. And, they started at, look at what we're talking about here. They're talking about getting to like a level 3 of maturity in project management. They've doubled, tripled, quadrupled their throughput and their impact. And I would say the way their members feel now is drastically different. And they did that with starting from 0. Mike had no project management experience. The team of project managers and sponsors had never been formally trained in project management. They didn't have much in the way of templates, tools, process. It wasn't about that. It was about doing the right things in the right order with the right focus. And that's what Mike and his team learned through the Impact Engine system. But it's really just simple. You don't have to, right, Rachel, you're solving business problems. And when you do that, you don't need a bunch of fancy tools and process to start. Just start. We never let them even talk about tools until they were much farther along in the process of just understanding what are the business problems we're solving and how do we want to solve them here. Process first, then tools. So if Mike and his team can do it, You don't have to have PMO Strategies by your side. Definitely helps, but you don't have to have us by your side to do this. You can start from nothing and get where you're trying to go. It's just a matter of shifting the focus and the mindset.
And I've got to say, you can get a lot of insight from Laura's podcasts, from from some of our webinars, from some of our other partners do this kind of stuff as well, right? So there's a lot of information out there. Just make sure you pick the right information, because not everybody thinks this way. But I have to say that when you put that value at the heart of everything you do, right? I've just seen these kind of results again and again. That story might be told about how did it feel before and after. Laura, you and I have done interviews with joint customers where they said, God, I wanted to quit, and now I can't wait to get into the office, right?
Yeah.
And it's not because we've got magic software that makes you feel good. It's not because Laura has a bag full of fairy dust that she sprinkles on people.
Might have that though.
It's just, yeah, exactly. There's just a simple process. If you do these things, good things will happen.
Yeah, solve business problems. Go help your business leaders solve problems.
Absolutely. So a good place to start. We are pretty much top of the hour, folks. So apologies if we didn't get to everything. Oh, there you go. Rachel's got a fairy dust out. If you want to get started, this QR code, just give it a scan. We'll send a link as well in the follow-up email. But this QR code, if you scan that, there's a bunch of information to help you get started, right, with these ideas. And there's a bunch of stuff. This is, if you want to go take a look at the APA, I'm going to leave this here for a few seconds so you can be snapping away. This is them. You want to go talk to Laura and the team. The QR code on the right is the one for you. So we're all QR'd out at this point. Before I do the obligatory thank yous, just very quickly, there's a few other events coming up that I think are quite notable. First one, Laura and I yesterday recorded this podcast that's coming out on the 28th, where we're going to be talking about AI and portfolio management. I'm really hoping that, Laura, you leave some of the bloopers in, because we were rolling on the floor laughing doing this. It was so much fun.
Now I got to hear this, Stuart.
Yeah, you should.
The unedited version.
I want to hear the bloopers.
I've known Laura for I don't know how many years now, right? And she did the intro. She's like, "This is I want to introduce my good friend Stuart Eastwood. What's your name again?"
Sometimes the mouth breaks, right? It's part of being human.
Absolutely. And then next month we're going to be. I'm so excited because we're going to be doing a little bit of a reveal on Laura's book, giving you all a little sneaky peeky. Laura's going to come on, tell us all about it. So be there or be square. You'll see it coming out in our newsletter and things like that. And then of course we have our monthly demo webinars. If you're intrigued, Mike keeps talking about doing prioritization. Laura's talked about our software. If you want to see what it looks like, sign up for the live webinar and we'll walk you through it. So with that being said, first of all, Mike, thank you.
I was going to say, Stuart, thank you for inviting me. This has really been so much fun. I appreciate it.
It's so Laura and I do the speaking circuit quite a bit, right? And we get so much feedback from people. I know we're just sitting here talking to a screen, right? But there are people on the other side of that screen, and they get so much value from sessions like this, Mike. So on behalf of everybody, thank you very much for sharing. It's always feels like it's a risky thing to do, to open yourself up. So
I'm thrilled to be part of it. Thanks again.
So thank you. Laura, thank you for joining us and contributing. It's always great to have you on. Thank you to Rachel, Ashok, and Dawn, and everyone else who's been in the chat doing stuff. It's always great when you guys contribute as well, with questions and comments and your own insight. Always makes these sessions much better. So thank you very much. I'm just going to jump back to the QR codes there for you guys. I'm going to leave that there for a few seconds. So anyone who wants to contact you guys can grab that. Just grab a
I
screenshot.
just want to share something about Mike. Mike, first of all, Don and I are incredibly proud of you and the whole APA team, and you motivate and inspire us to do really big things and really hard things to help all of you, and we're just so proud of you. And also, little shout out to the fact that Mike was written up in an industry trade magazine for this new role called the Strategy Delivery Office Leader. Which came about because we let Mike's CEO and C-suite executives name the PMO. And they didn't call it Project Management Office. They said, well, what is it we're trying to solve here? And we guided them through a discussion. And they said, yeah, we're trying to deliver our strategy. Let's call it the Strategy Delivery Office. And then Mike got a lot of airtime in his industry for this new role that is making waves in the community for really helping organizations thrive. So huge shout out to you, Mike. We're incredibly proud of you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Laura.
Yeah,
I love
absolutely.
that. I can feel the glow to your face from here, Mike.
It's just,
we embarrass him
Excellent.
sometimes. We're so proud.
I know it's very embarrassing, but thanks again.
Excellent. So thank you everybody for joining, and I hope to see you all again on the next webinar.